Here's source A. Here's source B. Study sources A and B. How useful are sources A and B for an inquiry into attitudes towards the police in Whitechapel in 1888? Explain your answer using sources A and B and your knowledge of the historical context. 8 marks. This is the mark scheme for this question, which you can find out about in more detail in our overview video. But we do know that all 8 marks here are awarded for A03, which is your analysis and evaluation of source utility. So essentially, how useful is that source for the inquiry given to you in the question? To decide that, you should focus on at least one of the following: accuracy, reliability, limitations, knowledge of the author, or valuable information offered by the source itself. Remember that this isn't a comparison. You can treat the sources separately, but you don't need to decide if one is more useful than the other. You might also want to bring in some existing knowledge that you have, but if you do, just try and make sure that it's relevant and that it actually helps the point that you're trying to make. Here are the bands for this question, which again are explained in more detail in the overview video, but generally speaking, to score highly on this question, you need to have reached a judgment on how useful the source is for the particular inquiry. You then need to explain why you think that it's useful or isn't useful. To do that, you need to make use of the information available to you, whether that's the content of the source itself, the information the question gives you about the source, or your own contextual knowledge. Let's take a look at some points that you could have made. As long as what you say is relevant to the question and correct, the examiner will give you the marks. But let's take a look at some examples, starting with source A. You can see that the mark scheme is organised into, first of all, the utility of the content of the source. So we could say that the source shows criminals hiding from the police, and then make a judgment that maybe that suggests that there was a popular belief that the police were incompetent because they couldn't catch the criminals. We could then maybe look at the utility of the source's provenance. So, for example, it tells us that it was printed in a satirical magazine and therefore intended to make fun of the police and entertain readers, rather than actually informing them of the way that crime was handled. Next, we might want to look at the relation of the source to its historical context. So we know that around this time, policing in Whitechapel had become more visible because of the introduction of beat constables. And because they were so present and so visible, it was expected that they would try and deter criminality. But the fact that criminals are hiding in this source suggests that actually that wasn't particularly effective. Now let's take a look at some examples for source B. So if you're making a statement on the utility of the content of the source, then you could say that the source says that police have taken a lot of time and effort to find Jack the Ripper but haven't succeeded. Maybe that suggests that there is a popular belief that the police weren't doing their job properly or very well. You then might want to look at the utility of the source's provenance. So because this was a national news, it might suggest that the attitudes given in the source towards the police were held across the country and not just popular in London. You then might want to look at the utility of the source in relation to its historical context. So we know that Whitechapel was policed by the H Division. It was run by Superintendent Constable and had a hierarchy of policemen below him. So this was a very new and elaborate model of policing, which was expected to make policing more efficient and more effective. But because they weren't able to find Jack the Ripper still, then it might show that the newspaper is trying to condemn the police's efforts. So lots of points here, so have a look through and see if there's anything you could have added to your answer.